They said the Oak Haven Hospital stood upon blessed ground. The truth, however, was buried beneath its foundation, and someone made certain it stayed that way. Welcome back. Before we continue, like, subscribe, share. In the spring of 1834, the newly chartered Oak Haven Infirmary for the indigent and feeble-minded opened on the outskirts of Dunmere, a small New England town not yet mapped on federal records. It was funded quietly through the Merrin family, textile magnates whose philanthropic ambitions were matched only by their need to obscure their own industrial tragedies. The building's official plans, preserved in the county archive, list its architect as Jonathan Bell, though correspondence between Bell and Dr. Alden Merrin, the hospital's founder, makes clear that the true design was a collaborative effort, part medicine, part penance. Early drafts describe subterranean isolation wards constructed of local limestone, their purpose noted only as therapeutic confinement of the morally ill. Within the first year, 12 patients died of respiratory failures of undetermined origin, yet none of their names appear in state mortality ledgers. Instead, they were recorded under a single line in Merrin's personal ledger. Specimens retained for pathological study. Locals at the time spoke of strange lights in the basement wings and of doctors who worked long after midnight. Parish records show that Reverend Collier refused to consecrate the hospital chapel after visiting its lower floors, citing the presence of bodies unburied and unrepentant. By 1836, the town physician resigned. His final note to the Board of Trustees, still kept among the Merrin estate papers, reads simply, "I will not sign another death certificate for a man who yet breathes." After his departure, Merrin's nephew, Dr. Silas Venn, assumed control of patient care and began extensive anatomical documentation. Surviving notebooks include sketches of skull deformities and tissue samples labeled by number rather than name. Marginalia in Venn's handwriting refers to hereditary taint, a phrase consistent with early theories of degeneracy, common among medical reformers of the period. The hospital continued to expand its success, celebrated in local papers as a beacon of modern science, while beneath, the infirmary's foundations sank into deeper ground. Workers later testified that portions of the substructure were sealed off entirely, bricked over at Merrin's instruction after an accident in late 1837. No records of that accident survive. In 1841, the state issued a commendation for remarkable advancements in anatomical education. The same year, Oak Haven quietly discontinued burials in its northern plot. No reason was ever given, though aerial surveys in the 1920s would show irregular soil patterns, their narrow, aligned depressions running parallel to the original cellar wall. When Oak Haven closed in 1889, its ledgers, casebooks, and autopsy reports were divided among private collections and university archives. The Merrin family ensured that none of the material reached public record. What remains are fragments, a letter from a frightened nurse, a missing page from Venn's anatomy log, and a series of unsigned memoranda discussing the genetic implications of confinement. Those who have examined the surviving documents agree on one point. Oak Haven's true purpose was not to heal, but to study its patients reduced to lineage, its physicians to archivists of decay. And yet, as renovations began in 1902, when the city planned to convert the site into municipal housing, something was uncovered beneath the east foundations, something no one included in their final reports. The eastern wing of Oak Haven had always been spoken of in whispers, even among the staff. Its doors remained bolted most days, the key kept by Dr. Silas Venn himself. In the winter of 1838, a groundskeeper named Thomas Reeve recorded hearing a constant ticking, like a dozen pocket watches, though none were seen. It seemed to emanate from behind the stone wall where the eastern corridor ended. When he mentioned this to the matron, she advised him to forget it. The doctors are counting time differently down there. In 1840, a visiting inspector noted inconsistencies in the hospital's inventory. Medical instruments unaccounted for, quantities of formalin and carbolic acid exceeding reported use, and a recurring reference in the requisition log to preservative materials, Series B. The handwriting beside these entries was not Merrin's nor Venn's. It was unfamiliar narrow, deliberate, without flourish. Some historians now suspect a third hand was involved, an unregistered physician or assistant who left no trace beyond those. Annotations by cross-referencing the surviving correspondence, one letter stands apart. Addressed to Dr. Merrin, it reads, "I have, at last, completed the indexing of the bodies from the first term. You will find that most exhibit the cranial elongation you described. The rest those born of unrelated stock decay faster. The trait persists, but only under proximity. No signature follows, just the letter A." When the hospital expanded in 1844, new wards were constructed above the original basements. During excavation, workers uncovered an iron door behind the east wall, sealed shut with rivets. The foreman claimed that Dr. Venn ordered it left untouched, saying it led only to obsolete storage. The following week, the foreman resigned, stating his men refused to continue after hearing voices in the drain pipes. That same year, patient admissions doubled. Many were drawn from nearby villages' children, the elderly, those deemed unfit for moral society. The ledgers show curious repetition, identical surnames recurring over decades, entire family lines processed through O'Caven's wards. It is now believed that the hospital was conducting a form of generational study, tracing congenital deformities and mental illnesses through bloodlines, though no such authorization ever existed. One surviving diary, written by nurse Ellen Price between 1846 and 1848, offers the only eyewitness account of what may have occurred below ground. Each night the doctors took the quiet ones, those with the same faces as the portraits in the hall. They said it was for examination, but they never returned. The ticking in the walls has grown louder. It is not clocks, I think, but hearts that refuse to stop. Her journal ends abruptly after this entry by the mid-1850s. Reports of illness among the staff, increased sleeplessness, paranoia, skin ailments described as translucent irritation. Merrin dismissed them as hysteria caused by the damp air. Yet his letters to the board betray a different tone. The subjects will not stay inert. There are murmurs from beneath the slabs. I suspect air movement from the old cellar vents, but Venn disagrees. He insists it is speech. In 1859, O'Caven's upper wards suffered a structural collapse following heavy rain. Only one attendant survived, claiming he saw figures moving in the rubble, their eyes open though the dust still fell upon them. The area was sealed and marked unsafe. Subsequent blueprints omit the eastern wing entirely. For decades afterward, local children dared one another to peer through the rusted grates near the hill where O'Caven once stood. They said if you listened long enough, you could hear that same steady ticking beneath the soil. Counting the years, no one wanted remembered. By 1862, O'Caven had changed hands once. More, Dr. Silas Venn's health had declined what witnesses later described as a progressive wasting of the nerves. He moved into a small chamber adjacent to the lower surgical theatre and rarely emerged by daylight. His handwriting, once disciplined and angular, grew erratic in the ledgers, the ink faint where his hand trembled. Yet it was during this time that he compiled what is now known as the Anatomist's Folio, a volume of sketches, anatomical cross-sections, and marginal observations that scholars still dispute, bound in calfskin. Its title embossed only with the letter V. The folio catalogues 63 subjects, numbered but unnamed. Each drawing is paired with measurements of bone, structure, and notes on persistence of resemblance between distant generations. The first half resembles standard anatomical study, though increasingly the figures are drawn in unnatural poses, their limbs contorted to reveal what he termed familial symmetries. The later pages diverge, entirely showing not corpses, but replicas of the same faces, repeated at differing ages, as though time itself were the variable under examination. A marginal line on page 201 reads, "They share more than lineage, they share the same pulse." When the hospital's new superintendent, Dr. Edwin Cross, arrived in 1864, he described finding Venn's laboratory in ruinous disarray, and the air rich with sweet corruption. In his first report to the board, Cross recommended the basement laboratories be permanently closed, yet days later, a fire broke out in the upper wards, destroying several rooms and injuring 12. The official cause was listed as a ruptured oil lamp, though multiple witnesses swore the flames came upward. Through the floorboards, Cross's reforms transformed Oakhaven into a training center for medical apprentices, many of them unlicensed. Among their duties was the cataloguing of old specimens for disposal. One student, Samuel Quinn, kept private notes describing a great quantity of waxen heads in jars, too similar to be coincidence. He also references a sealed trunk containing instruments resembling both surgical and musical devices. No record exists of that trunk being removed after Venn's death in 1865. His remains were not sent to family but interred within the hospital's foundation, per the deceased's request. The entry in the burial log is unique, signed only by Dr. Cross and witnessed by no one. Curiously, a subsequent edition in faded ink reads, "Reinterred with materials for continued observation." By 1871, the surrounding town of Dunmere began experiencing odd reports. Livestock found drained of blood, grave soil disturbed without evidence of theft. The local constable attributed it to grave robbers supplying anatomy schools. But an unsigned letter from a former Oakhaven attendant paints a different picture. What was beneath never ceased its movement. They said the doctor was gone, but I have heard his breathing through the pipes. The university archives now hold one surviving artifact from this era fragment of human skull embedded with surgical wire, tagged with Venn's initials. Forensic analysis conducted in the 1930s concluded that the bone showed signs of healing, suggesting the wiring had been performed on a living subject by the close of the 19th century. Oakhaven's reputation as a medical institution was in ruins. Funding ceased, and the Marin heirs sold the property to the state. Yet before the final clearance, workmen discovered a small room walled within another, a chamber filled with ledgers, vials, and a single phonograph cylinder labeled simply "Continuation." The cylinder's contents remain unverified. The recording was reportedly too faint, the voice distorted by age. Still, Those who heard it described the faint rhythmic sound between words, soft, measured, inescapably familiar, a ticking dot, the same heartbeat that never stopped beneath Oakhaven's soil. In 1878, the state acquired Oakhaven under the Public Health Reclamation Act, intending to convert the grounds into a convalescent refuge for wounded veterans. The site inspection reports, preserved in the Dunmere Municipal Archive, offer the first impartial descriptions of the interior since Merrin's era. Surveyor Elias Trenton wrote, "The lower wards are inaccessible due to subsidence. Airfoul, floors slick as if coated by a thin resin. The scent, unlike decay, is metallic, familiar only to those long in the trade." Trenton's team recovered boxes of deteriorating documents from the Western offices, incomplete anatomy charts, and correspondence between Venn and an unnamed associate, referred to only as the archivist. Most of these materials were sent to the State Medical College for review. Within months, the college sealed its report, citing ethical concerns and lack of verifiable provenance. Among the retrieved materials were the reclamation files, a series of medical charts cataloguing 57 patients admitted between 1866 and 1875. The first columns list symptoms: nervous agitation, distortion of features, repetition of speech patterns, unresponsiveness to narcotics. But the later pages bear revisions in another hand, entries rewritten with unsettling uniformity. Subject exhibits inherited resemblance. The voice is consistent. Memory persists. The handwriting matches samples of Dr. Vent's from the final decade of his life, implying these additions were made posthumously or by one imitating him. 2 workers later claimed to have found skeletal remains in the old heating tunnels, each with a length of surgical wire threaded behind the jawbone. They reported this discovery to the foreman, who dismissed it as old instructional material. Within a week, both men had left Dunmere without collecting their wages. A separate memorandum, dated April 2nd, 1880, records a night watchman's complaint of hearing pressures in the wall, like someone speaking through water. Trenton annotated the report with a brief note: pipes empty, air cool, sound mechanical. The entry ends with his signature and a line later scratched out so deeply the paper tore. When the Veterans Hospital project collapsed in 1883, Oakhaven was left to rot. The state abandoned its archives, and the Merrin family purchased back the property under a legal proxy. For reasons unknown, the site's title deed was transferred to a company named Heliograph and Sons, a firm that, according to tax records, never existed. In the last surviving letter from the Merrin estate, written by Alden's granddaughter, Clara, she describes visiting the property after decades of disuse. The doors no longer shut, the walls sweat in the morning cold. Downstairs, there is a chamber that answers when you breathe. I thought it echo, but it was earlier than my own breath. Clara vanished 3 days after writing that letter. Asterisk in 1889. The town finally condemned Oakhaven as structurally unsound. Demolition crews began the process in July. Their superintendent, Robert Hale, reported a cavity of unnatural depth beneath the eastern wing. Inside, they found remnants of a tiled floor, blackened as though burned, and an iron table fused to the stone beneath it. Hale's statement, filed with the county, closes with the following: "The floor pulses when struck, as if hollow, as if something below were waiting for the sound." The demolition halted that same afternoon. The official reason: ground instability. No further work was ever recorded that autumn. Hale took ill with a fever described by his physician as nervous exhaustion. He was found dead 2 months later, seated upright, both ears filled with dried blood. On his desk was a note, unsigned and barely legible. They never stopped counting. And somewhere beneath the soil of oak, beneath the stones once blessed and renamed, the ticking continued slower now, patient, as though keeping time with whoever dared remember. In the spring of 1891, a curator named Harold Fenn of the Dunmere Historical Society obtained access to Oakhaven's sealed records through a clerical error in the state archives. Among the crates was a small, dust-covered box marked East Foundation, audio material. Inside lay the single surviving phonograph cylinder discovered years before, its wax surface scored with tiny concentric grooves. The label still intact. Continuation. Fenn noted that the cylinder's recording was faint, warped by age, yet when played, it yielded more than static. Beneath the hiss, he heard a man's voice murmuring in precise, rhythmic cadence. The first numbers were ordinary, 1, 2, 3. But the pattern soon grew erratic, skipping certain values, repeating others with growing intensity, until a metallic tap began beneath the speech, synchronized with each utterance. The archivist described feeling the table tremble, as if echoing the same pulse. The transcript he prepared that night survives in his handwriting. 30-7, 40-1, 41 again, still breathing, the voice continues, though the machine is stopped. 2 days later, Fenn was found unconscious in his study. When he awoke, he claimed to have dreamt of descending corridors, slick and white, as if carved from bone. His wife reported that he had begun murmuring numbers in his sleep always, the same sequence, ending with 40-1 after Fenn's collapse. The Historical Society sealed the box again and returned it to storage, yet records indicate someone later signed it out under the alias E. Cross. The handwriting matches none of the living trustees. The cylinder has not been seen since. Meanwhile, public rumor rekindled around the ruins of Oakhaven. Local children began finding small glass fragments on the hill curved, thick, and tinted faintly yellow. Some contained traces of old fluid, viscous even after decades. One boy reportedly cut himself while pocketing a piece. Within days, the wound had turned pale, almost translucent, leaving behind a pattern resembling the delicate branching of veins seen under a microscope by 1894. The state ordered the ruins buried and fenced. Yet Fenn's successor, a young scholar named Margaret Hale, reopened his notes and found something he had missed. At the bottom of his transcription page was a smudge of brownish ink, which, under magnification, revealed a second line, written in smaller script. Below 41, there is silence. Below silence, replication. Hale traced the phrase to one of Dr. Venn's notebooks catalogued as specimen for 1B. Its contents describe an attempt to induce continuity of identity through physical inheritance, a crude theory of consciousness bound to the flesh, suggesting that memory itself could be passed through organic material, cross-referencing with the reclamation files, who reveals that patient for 1B had been marked incomplete. Extraction. The location of the remains is unknown. In 1897, the town granted permission for limited excavation near the old East Foundation to confirm structural safety before reselling the land. Work halted after only 1 day. Foreman's notes describe a cavity, dry and resonant, within which they discovered a mass of twisted metal resembling phonograph tubing. Witnesses claimed the tubes were warm to the touch, though the ground above was frozen. One laborer recalled pressing his ear to the structure and hearing a man counting, slowly, as if from a great distance. That same evening, a soft vibration rippled through the field. Locals described it as thunder underground, lasting nearly an hour. The next morning, a fine powder coated the soil, smelling faintly of oil and iron. Hale's final entry, written weeks before she disappeared, reads, "There is no recording left, only the echo of a machine still turning beneath the stone. Whatever Marin and Venn began, it does not require breath to continue. The ledger is written now in flesh." When Margaret Hale vanished in the winter of 1897, her absence drew little notice. The archives were already considered cursed, and the few colleagues who had seen her in those last weeks described her as thin as parchment and constantly watching her own reflection, as if waiting for it to move first. Her rented room above the apothecary was left untouched for months. When the landlord finally entered, he found the walls covered in lists of names, dates, and ledger numbers written in a looping, obsessive hand. Every line ended with the same notation, 41. Among her belongings was a small mirror, the glass warped with age. Scrawled on its reverse, in ink mixed with what seemed to be rust, were the words, "The ledger looks back." A week later, a clerk cataloguing Hale's papers noticed a faint pattern emerging in her notes, an alternating sequence of names corresponding to workers who had died during the Oakhaven excavation, and entries from the reclamation ledgers Dr. Venn had maintained in the 1830s. The handwriting differed, yet the pairing was precise. Each 19th century workman's name was matched to a subject from decades earlier, as though the same individuals had appeared under different identities, separated by 60 years. In Hale's own commentary, she suggested that the ledger was not merely a record, but a mechanism of continuity, each entry transferring an unfinished calculation from one human life to another. She theorized that the missing cylinder labeled continuation wasn't a recording of sound, but a template, meant to resonate with organic matter and reawaken memory embedded within. Her final note before disappearance read simply, "If consciousness repeats, it must also remember its last burial." In early 1898, the Dunmere Historical Society received a letter postmarked from Baltimore bearing no return address. Inside was a single page of Hale's handwriting and a photograph of an open ledger reflected in a mirror. The reflection showed different entries' names that did not exist on the visible page. Among them was Harold Fenn, listed with the annotation restarted. 1891. No one could explain the trick. The mirror itself, recovered months later, was found to have a thin residue of quicksilver pooled at the bottom edge, as though the glass had begun to melt. Laboratory analysis reported traces of hemoglobin mixed with mercury. That same month, an anonymous donor sent a sealed crate to the society with instructions to place it beside the east wall, where the soil hums. Inside was an iron-bound box containing fragments of wax cylinders, each shattered but still etched with faint spiral markings. The label, almost unreadable, bore one word, reflected. When the pieces were arranged under light, the grooves appeared, reversed, spiraling outward instead of inward. Fenn's successor attempted to play one fragment in an experimental phonograph built for reversed recording. What emerged was not speech, but the distinct sound of breathing. A long inhale, a pause, and then a whisper that technicians described as the same voice twice over. one lagging slightly behind the other. That spring, the society closed its doors permanently. All items relating to the Oakhaven case were shipped to the Smithfield Repository, a federal archive for anomalous historical artifacts. There, a night attendant filed a final report before resigning, in storage vault for B. There is a mirror covered with cloth. Each morning, the cloth has shifted slightly. I have seen movement in its surface, a flicker, not of light, but of someone counting silently behind the glass. The report ends with the phrase, below 41, reflection. Below reflection, return. No further record of the mirror ledger exists, but locals still tell of a faint tapping sound in the buried fields where Oakhaven once stood steady, deliberate and counting. By 1901, the Smithfield Repository had grown into a silent mausoleum of misfit relic straws, filled with anatomical sketches, fragments of wax, and the brittle residue of experiments. No institution officially sanctioned. Among these was an unmarked cabinet delivered without documentation, containing a series of preserved organs suspended in a cloudy amber fluid. The jars bore handwritten labels, though the ink had almost dissolved. A faint copperplate scrawl could still be read on one. Subject 41. Vocal, archivist Dr. Edwin Lorne. Newly appointed to Smithfield, recorded in his logbook that the organs seemed to hum faintly when moved, producing a sound akin to the resonance of a tuning fork held underwater. Thinking it an echo of his own imagination, he left the cabinet sealed. But 3 nights later, the night watchman reported hearing muffled whispers from that same storage wing. At first, Lorne dismissed the claim as nerves until the repository's cleaning woman, Mrs. Archer, refused to enter the room entirely. "It's the breath, sir," she told him. "You hear breathing like someone asleep, only it's coming from the bottles." In his notes, Lorne described a compulsion to catalogue each specimen despite the nausea it induced. The tissue appeared neither human nor animal, but something between fibres, too symmetrical. Veins like engraved lines. He observed a curious pattern. Each jar contained a fragment of the same organ, replicated with microscopic precision, as if an entire anatomy had been dismantled, copied and distributed across multiple vessels. Inside drawer for. Beneath the row labeled vocal, Lorne discovered a glass plate with thin slices of what appeared to be laryngeal cartilage. Affixed to the plate was a yellowing slip, recovered Oakhaven, 1834. Comparative Study of Regeneration Under Acoustic Stimuli, Dr. V. The handwriting matched that of Dr. Silas Venn. When Lorne placed the glass under magnification, he noticed hairline cracks forming rhythmic patterns across the tissue, perfectly matching the waveform of a spoken phrase, "We are unfinished." In early March 1902, the repository's ventilation system failed, filling several wings with stagnant air. During repairs, workers opened a blocked grate behind the specimen cabinets and found it packed with old wax fragments, the same reversed. Cylinders once marked reflected. A chemical reanalysis showed traces of human epithelial cells embedded within the wax, as though the recordings had grown from living tissue rather than being impressed upon it. That night, Lorne dreamed of the specimens whispering beneath the fluid. When he awoke, he found his desk drawer open, his own journal saturated with the same amber residue used in the preservation jars. The words written there, though in his handwriting, were not ones he remembered composing. The voice does not die. It migrates. The organs remember. His final entry, dated April 2nd, 1902, reads, "Subject 41 corresponds to all. The line continues. The mirror, the ledger, the organs, they are components of the same system. Memory recycles through flesh. Venn built the equation. Hale found the reflection. Now it waits for a listener. 2 days later, Dr. Lorne resigned without notice. His room at the boarding house was left in disarray. On the nightstand, police found a small jar filled with amber liquid. Inside floated a single fragment of cartilage marked in ink, 41, vocal, reawakened. The jar was returned to the repository, where it remains unlisted in the public inventory. Staff who work late claim they sometimes hear faint murmurs, emanating from the cabinet hall soft, labored and trying to form words. In October 1902, 6 months after Dr. Lorne's disappearance, the Smithfield Repository transferred several crates of Venn's recovered materials to a government research branch known only in correspondence as the Office of Physiological Continuance. Officially, it never existed. Its records survive only through fragments in private collections typed memoranda, receipts for organic compounds, and a heavily censored report dated December 4, 1903, titled Experiment 41, Persistence of Vocal Tissue under Resonant Induction. The experiment's lead physician was Dr. Lucien Marr, a former student of Venn's. His goal, according to the fragments, was to replicate what Venn had called acoustic survival, the transference of human memory through sustained vibration. The apparatus used in Marr's trial combined elements from Hale's mirror, Lorne's preserved organs, and one surviving wax fragment believed to be the continuation cylinder itself. Witness accounts from later depositions described the laboratory, a long room beneath the old Fenwick Hospital, lined with mirrors and copper wiring, the air smelling faintly of disinfectant and burning resin. At its center stood a table draped in oilcloth, upon which rested a single jar of amber fluid. Inside floated what Marr called the organ of recurrence larynx, assembled from the preserved specimens. Bound together with silver thread, the test began at midnight on November 27, 1903. Marr instructed his assistants to seal the doors and dim the lamps. Using a modified phonograph, he played the reversed fragment marked reflected. The sound, by all accounts, was unbearably inhuman hum that seemed to vibrate the lungs. Instruments registered the resonance not in air, but within the glass and fluid itself. At the 6-minute mark, the jar began to tremble. Observers claimed the liquid moved against gravity, rising along the sides like breath on a cold window. Marr spoke into the recording horn, repeating the phrase found etched on Venn's tissue samples, "We are unfinished." What happened next was recorded in only one surviving account penned by Marr's assistant Elias Crane, who vanished 2 weeks later. His words, later recovered from his boarding room, are written in a trembling hand. The voice answered, not from the horn, but from within the jar. It spoke in plural. The surface pulsed like a throat-forming syllables. It said, "We remember the shed, the summer of sickness, the buried ones." Then the glass broke, though no sound of shattering occurred. The room filled with something colder than air-like pressure or the absence of breath. Marr screamed that it had learned to modulate. He said it could travel now, through sound. Then the lamps burst, and we were in the dark. Crane's account ends abruptly. No formal report of Marr's death exists, but a maintenance log from the Fenwick Hospital that December lists extensive fire damage in lower wards, origin uncertain, personnel unaccounted. A photograph recovered from the same file shows the experiment table after the incident. The jar is gone. On the wall behind it, faint letters appear burned into plaster, though reversed as if reflected in glass. The text reads, "Below 41, reflection. Below reflection, return." It is the same phrase found in Lorne's final notes. The government closed the Office of Physiological Continuance the following spring. Its materials were seized and reclassified under public health hazard, stored in sealed vaults beneath the Langley archives. No specimens were ever officially acknowledged. Yet for decades afterward, staff in those archives reported a recurring phenomenon, a low vibration in the metal shelving, rhythmic as breathing, always beginning near drawer for 1. No one opens it now. The label has worn away, leaving only an indentation where the words once were but when light passes across the steel at the right angle. The reflection still forms letters that were never carved there. We are still unfinished. By the spring of 1904, what remained of the Venn materials had been scattered through private hands and forgotten archives. Yet the vibrations continued, quiet, persistent, and localized. Reports emerged from Whitby-Anfen, a coastal town miles from the experiment site, where residents described hearing breathing in the walls. It began, according to local letters, soon after the arrival of a reclusive tenant at No. 41 Harrow Road Narrow. Salt-stained townhouse, owned by the state but leased under an unlisted name. Dr. Elias Crane. Crane had survived the Fenwick fire after all, though his body bore scars described by the coroner as phonographic burns, thin concentric rings, as though impressed by sound waves. Neighbors rarely saw him, save for brief outings at dawn, when he would carry sealed glass jars to the cliffs and throw them into the sea. At night, they reported flickering lights in the upper window, and a low hum sometimes mistaken for thunder that seemed to rise from the house itself, a surviving entry from Crane's personal notebook, dated May 17, 1904, offers the only first-hand account of what occurred inside. It follows vibration. I thought destruction ended it, but the sound is never gone, merely displaced. When I sleep, the walls pulse with its rhythm. The glass mirrors back the tone. It is learning speech again, fragment by fragment, through echo. I cannot determine whether the voice is mine or something borrowed from the residue of the others. He notes the return of the same phrase. Ma recorded, "We are unfinished." Only now, Crane claims, it speaks before he sets any phonograph in motion. He describes the phenomenon as self-sustaining resonance, an acoustic parasite-seeking structure within nearby materials. By June, local constables responded to complaints from adjoining tenants that the doctor's house sings in the night. Upon investigation, they found the dwelling empty, though the air inside vibrated faintly as though a tuning fork had just been struck. The rooms were lined with mirrors and copper wires, much like the Fenwick apparatus. In the cellars stood a phonograph, still spinning, its needle tracing an unmarked wax cylinder. The transcription, partial and distorted, was made by the inspector on site. His notes read, "The recording consists of overlapping voices, male and female, indistinguishable, words unclear, except repetition of unfinished and remember. At 30 seconds, there is a breaker human voice saying, 'They follow the sound. Wherever it echoes, they build themselves again.' Thereafter, mechanical hum. Temperature in room dropped sharply. The house was boarded the next day. By August 1904, it had been sold at auction to an unknowing buyer. The new tenants, the Harriman family, reported no disturbances for the first week. Then, one evening, Their son awoke to the noise of whispering beneath the floorboards. The child described it not as voices, but as people learning how to talk. What followed can only be reconstructed from letters, written by Mrs. Harriman to her sister. The mirrors sweat in the mornings, though the glass is cold to the touch. At night we hear tapping first like rain, then like breath. My husband took ill after listening too long to a faint music behind the walls. When he sleeps, he mouths the same phrase, though he swears he dreams of nothing. The family fled the property by winter. The house stood vacant until it was condemned in 1906. Demolition workers refused to touch it, after their tools began ringing when left near the walls. The building was instead buried under new administrative post for the public health office, but the sound did not vanish. Visitors to the new structure still standing today as Harrow District Registry have occasionally reported a humming beneath the floors. Maintenance crews chalk it up to old plumbing. Yet when one records the sound and plays it backward, the tone resolves into a faint, layered whisperer chorus, repeating what Ven, Lorne, and Ma had all heard in their own time. We remember the mirror. We are waiting for reflection, and if one listens long enough, just under the hum, a single distinct voice forms. It sounds like Crane. Do not record it. It learns. When the registry's lower vault was renovated in 1937, an archivist named Margaret Ellery was tasked with recataloguing the remaining sealed boxes from the Office of Physiological Continuance. She was 26, newly appointed, methodical. Her logbook begins plainly enough an inventory of rusted phonograph parts, broken jars, and unlabeled wax fragments. Then, abruptly, her handwriting changes. The entry dated October 3, 1937 reads, Box 41 opened. Contents intact but resonant. The cylinder hums at touch, though not wound. Surface bears no grooves. Under lamplight, reflection moves independently, mouths forming shapes. She sealed the box again and filed a maintenance request for auditory interference in lower archive. The report was ignored 3 days later. Ellery recorded a final note in shorthand, almost frantic. It knows my name. Heard it through the glass. Voice, same as mine, but coming from behind reflection. Said it remembers the sea, the jars, and that it cannot stop unless I listen fully. The entry ends mid-sentence. Her disappearance was attributed to misadventure. Her bicycle was found near the riverbank. The remaining materials of Box 41 were quietly transferred to a government repository in Langley Cross, where they remain sealed. The Venn case file was officially closed in 1942. All subsequent references were redacted from public records. Yet during the war, technicians stationed at the Langley facility reported interference on their recording equipment, low pulses embedded in silence, patterned like Morse, but nonsensical when translated. Only one clear sequence repeated across transmissions, the signal for distress. In 1961, a restoration team digitizing the old wax cylinders captured something no one could explain, a whispering beneath the static, faint but articulate, repeating the phrase found in Crane's final note, do not record it. It learns. When the technicians replayed the file, their equipment emitted a tone that shattered a nearby glass screen. The sound was deleted from the archive, but the waveform image, briefly visible on screen, showed a mirrored shape of a human face, eyes closed, mouth open as if breathing. Present-day researchers at the Harrow District Registry occasionally mention odd feedback from their digital recorders, particularly in rooms that align with the foundations of the demolished house at No. 41. The hum still manifests during quiet hours, low and steady, too rhythmic to be mechanical. Some nights, when lights flicker across the polished floors, the reflections seem to move slightly slower than those who cast demand for an instant. They open their mouths, asterisk if one stays long enough. The tone becomes almost comprehensibly an overlapping chorus of layered echoes, growing clearer each year as our devices become more sensitive. The words are always the same, patient and calm, as if spoken through centuries of glass. We are still unfinished. We remember you. There is no official continuation of the Venn file, but occasionally, online archives report corrupted uploads audio recordings that duplicate themselves despite deletion, growing louder with each play. When examined spectrographically, their shapes resemble the same face that appeared on Langley's monitor in 1961. Whether this is mere coincidence or persistence of resonance, no one can say. Yet archivists whisper of a rule passed quietly through generations since Ellery's time: never record silence. It might already be speaking back.